All right, good morning, Rabosai. Begin by thanking our sponsors. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors, Naftali and Chavi Tilson from Eretz Yisrael, with Rav Naftali thanking his friend Benjamin for introducing him to the Daf. May Hashem bless us all to finish the Daf Yomi cycle together and celebrate with a siyum in Eretz Yisrael in Meretz Hashem. To thank Baruch Meir and Rina Dubin for dedicating the Shir Madrashos this month in the schos of our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisrael, and then the schos that in Meretz Hashem our children who are learning in Eretz Yisrael complete their year in safety and devekos to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and to Eretz Yisrael. To thank our week of learning sponsors, Alan and Shari Steinmetz, in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Alan's mother, Chaya Bas Reb Meir, and Jeff and Debbie Schwartz for dedicating the week of learning this week for a successful procedure and continued recovery for Jeff. He should be well. And to thank Zevi and Shoshi Daniel for dedicating the shir this morning in the Zechus of Refuah Shalema for Nami Bas Chana. We hope that she, together with Kol Cholei Yisrael, have a complete and enduring refuah. We'll see with that, let us begin. Today's daf is Memvav 46, and we are picking up on Memvav, actually second line from the top. Amar Balazar Mishum Bar Kafra. So we'll see some very interesting, and today we're going to, Meretz Hashem, finish the parak. So some very interesting sugyas that we have in the details of the Beis HaMikdash. So Amar Balazar Mishum Bar Kafra, or Amar Balazar Mishum Bar Kafra, Omer Hayir Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir used to say the following idea: Every ola shenisosru oselahen ma'aracha bifnei atzman v'sojans. Well, it's an interesting case. So every ola is the case of ola limbs which are left over. So if you take a look at, I haven't to go to Rashi yet, but if you have ola limbs which are left over, so we'll say the idea over here is, what's happening here is, remember, we spoke about the idea that at night there are no karbanos. So remember again, what's the only thing we're doing at night? At night, we are simply going ahead and burning leftover limbs and fats on the Mizbeach. What happens if, come the next morning, you still have leftover limbs? So what happens in that particular situation? So comes along Bar Kafra, in the name of Bar Kafra, saying that Rabbi Meir used to say, if you have ola limbs that are left over the next morning, Oselahan ma'aracha bifnei atzma. You make a brand new ma'aracha, a brand new pyre for them. And I remember, how did we end off yesterday? So how do we paskin? On a regular day, how many pyres on top of the Mizbeach? 3, right? Yom Kippur 4, regular day 3. We have ma'aracha gidola, which was the pyre used to burn karbanos, ma'aracha kitana, used for kitores, and what we call ma'aracha shel kiyum ha'esh, a third smaller ma'aracha that was really there just in case the ma'aracha gidola was not burning well. That third ma'aracha, that third pyre was there to help it out. And then again on Yom Kippur, you would have a fourth ma'aracha. You would have a fourth pyre that was there for what purpose? Ketores, right? The special ketores, so interesting, the special ketores of Yom Kippur got its own pyre. Now it's coming along Rabbi Meir, and Rabbi Meir is saying, oh, and by the way, if it happens to be that overnight the limbs of the ola don't burn well, the next morning you should go ahead and arrange a brand new pyre specifically to go ahead and burn off those limbs. To go ahead and take it. So in other words, what Rabbi Meir seems to be saying over here is, we don't want yesterday's limbs going on today's ma'aracha gidola. So you make a new ma'aracha. I know you will say, somebody, maybe Milt pointed out to me yesterday, the Mizbeach was huge. We're gonna get into the dimensions in Meretz Hashem, but the Mizbeach was quite huge. So there's room. There's enough room for every pyre, right? No pyre left out. Hey, so I'll say so. I just want to point out Rabbi Meir's idea is just create another pyre to go ahead and close out yesterday's sacrificial service. Sojourn, va'afilu b'Shabbos. And I will say, now, we don't paskin like this, Rabbi Meir. We know that already, right? Because again, we just said, we paskin on a regular day, all you have, maximum are 3 pyres, and on Yom Kippur, you have a fourth for the Ketores. So we don't paskin like this idea, but we're intrigued by this idea, specifically that last phrase, v'afilu b'Shabbos. And you could go ahead and you could do this even on Shabbos. So the Gemara says, my kamash malon. So what exactly are you coming to teach us? So after all, we learned Tanina, Bechol Yom Hayusham Arba Ma'arachos. Now we'll say, obviously this is reflecting a different opinion, right? That on every day they had 4 Ma'arachos on the Mizbeach. So again, so what's the chiddush over here? Rabbi Avin lo nitzrucha ella lipsulin. So we'll say, no, what's interesting about this is as follows, that actually what we're referring to over here are what we call psulin. Now we'll say, if you look at Rashi says psulin is hanach dim alu lo yerdu. We'll say there are a group of karbanos, interestingly enough, which you're not really supposed to offer up on the Mizbeach, but once you put them on, you do not take them down. So the Gemara is suggesting that's what we're referring to over here. V'dafka shemash labahana ar. But this is only assuming that the fire has already taken hold of these karbanos. But if the fire has not taken hold of these karbanos, then what? Then we'll take them down. Take a look at Rashi. So the Gemara now is suggesting that the novelty in this ruling is as follows. That Allah Chalamayse, if you had psulin, karbanos that were really invalid to go onto the Mizbeach, but you put them on. So what's the halacha? Once you put it on, you don't take it off. But when is that true? Only if the fire has actually taken hold of the carbon. But if the fire has not taken hold of the carbon, then what? Even though you put it on, what do? You take it off. Says the Gemara, there's an alternate version of this. Echad ksherin ve'echad psulin, imash labahana are in, ve'i lo. An alternate version says, we'll say, whether a carbon is kasher, whether a carbon is puzzle, once you put it on, right? Once you put it on and the fire takes hold of it, halacha lamaisi, you cannot take it off. Which I will say is an interesting nuance in halacha, because the truth is, before this Gemara, I would have assumed, at what point in time does a sacrificial item become the property of the Mizbeach? I would have assumed the moment you put it on. Now what the Gemara is suggesting is that maybe not. Maybe halacha lamaisa, a carbon really only becomes a sacrificial property of the Mizbeach once the fire takes hold of it. Now I will say, now you might think to yourself, oh, what does that matter when it becomes the sacrificial property, when it doesn't? Well, it does matter in the case the Gemara just mentioned, because in a case where you inadvertently put something puzzle on the Mizbeach, right? You inadvertently put something puzzle, so can I take it off? The Gemara will suggest it depends. Has the fire taken hold of it or not? If the fire has, you can't remove it anymore. If the fire has not, you can remove it. Let's look at that last phrase. What does it mean when it says, even on Shabbos? So the Gemara says, Tanina v'hayom chamesh. Now, remember again, according to the opinion who held that on a regular day you had 4 ma'arachos. Remember again, we had a machlokes, 3, 4, 5 ma'arachos, right? But even on a regular, everyone is agreeing that what happens on Yom Kippur? What does everyone agree with? You're adding 1 extra, right? That everyone is agreeing with. So the Gemara says, well, let's analyze this. V'hayom chamish, we learned before that according to the opinion who held that halacha lamaisa on a regular day you had 4, he would say that on Yom Kippur you had 5 ma'arachos. To which the Gemara is looking at Rashi, B'chol Yom, Hayu Arba Ma'arachos Tzinan, V'afilo B'Shabbos Mashma. So we'll say, B'Pashtos, that would apply even on Shabbos. Amar Rav Bar Yaakov, Itzterich. I'll tell you why this is necessary. Sa'adait Chamina, Hani Mili Heichad Dechal Yom Kippurim Nios Achar Shabbos. I would have thought that when do we say that halacha l'maisa? You add on an extra one, that's when Yom Kippur falls out after Shabbos. Dechal Be Shabbos Krevim Yom Kippurim. Because we'll say what I would say is like this. I would say that any leftover items from Shabbos can be offered up on the ma'arachos of Yom Kippur. Aval be'emtza Shabbos, but if halacha l'maisa, Yom Kippur falls out in the middle, emtza Shabbos means in the middle of the week, maybe the leftover limbs of, let's say, the previous day cannot be burned on Yom Kippur. Kamash malon, that I both say, see, the Gemara is saying like this, the Havamina is like this, when can I burn leftovers on Yom Kippur? That's when the Yom Kippur falls out on Motzei Shabbos, right? Our calendar doesn't allow that, right? But at the end of the day, before the calendar was set, Yom Kippur could fall out whenever. So halacha l'maisa, I would have thought, when can you burn leftover fats and limbs on Yom Kippur? That's when Yom Kippur falls out on Motzei Shabbos. I can burn the leftovers from Shabbos on Yom Kippur. But halacha l'maisa, if Yom Kippur falls out in the middle of the week, then maybe halacha l'maisa, I can't burn the leftovers on Yom Kippur. To which the Gemara says, Kamash malon, Kamash malon, even when Yom Kippur falls out in the middle of the week, you could burn the leftovers. Amar Rava. So Rava says, Man hay delo chayish lekamche. So Rava says, it's a little bit of a Talmudic insult over here. Rava says, who is the one who does not finely grind or sift his flour? Which was the way they used to say in the Beis Medrash, when you said something that was half-baked, right? When you said something that was not fully thought out, they would accuse you of not finely grinding your flour. You could use it, I will say. Use it at a meeting, see what happens. Right? I will say, so the Gemara says as follows. So the Gemara says, Man hay de lo chayish lekamche, ha b'chol yom tinan. Again, the Mishnah explicitly says this was the case every single day, to which the Gemara says, Kasha, you're right. Indeed, that is a question. Upliga de Rafuna. And I will say this argues on Rafuna, because what does Rafuna say? Da Amar, tchilaso docha, sofa eno docha. So I will say, listen to this. We're now going to spend a little bit of time analyzing the Shita of Rafuna. And Rafuna says, Rashi says over here, Pligi de Rapuna, ad bar kafra va'adirava, tamar b'chol yom demas nisan dafkahu, va'afilu b'shabes, de Rafuna savar b'chol yom lebar b'shabes. So let's listen to this. What we're going to see now is a fascinating machlokes in general about what, let's leave aside Yom Kippur for just a moment, but what you're allowed to do on Yom Kippur, or what you're allowed to do on Shabbos. See, I both say, what's happening over here is as follows, just to frame the case. It's a very simple case. I have a situation where the morning after, I have leftover limbs and fats, right? The goal is on a regular day, during the day you offer up your karbanos, nighttime is there to take care to burn any of the carbonic leftovers. In the case in question now, I have leftovers, I still have fats and limbs, or in this case limbs, the next morning. So the shaila is, what do I do with it? What do I do with it? So remember, this whole discussion started, Bar Kafra, quoting Rabbi Meir, says that halacha l'maisa, what you do is very simple. You create another pyre, a new pyre on the Mizbeach to burn the leftovers. Now what's interesting is Bar Kafra allowed that to happen even when? Afilu b'Shabbos. Afilu b'Shabbos. Now the Gemara, and Rava supports that as well. Now the Gemara is going to quote Rav Huna. And Rav Huna says, hold up. Even if I'm agreeing to the idea that on a regular weekday, if you have leftovers from the previous day, you could set up a new ma'aracha to go ahead and to burn the leftover limbs. Not so sure you could do that on Shabbos. So the Gemara says, Da Amar tchilasa docha, sofa ina docha. So we'll see what this means exactly. But let's take a look at Rashi. Rav Huna's position is as follows. He holds tchilasa docha, which means, look at Rashi, tamid shal Shabbos, nishcha b'Shabbos, akar b'Shabbos. The beginning of the sacrificial service is Docha Shabbos. So we'll say, for example, you could offer up a carbon tamid on Shabbos. Now we'll say, remember again, what's the chiddush in being able to offer up a carbon tamid on Shabbos? What's the chiddush in being able to offer up any carbon on Shabbos? Remember again, Shechita is one of the Lamed Tes Malachos, is one of the 39 Malachos. So how are you allowed to offer up karbanos in the Beis HaMikdash? Remember again, the most you can say in the Beis HaMikdash is what? Is that Shavuos is Docha Shabbos. There's no Drabanans in the Beis HaMikdash. But there are Dorais in the Beis HaMikdash. So how can you offer up a carbon? This is very simple. Why can you offer up a carbon in the Beis HaMikdash? Because the Torah said so. Because Chash Baruch Hu said that you offer up the Tamid every single day, in the morning and the evening, even on Shabbos, and you offer up a Karban Musaf. But for example, also remember again, can you bring Karbanos Yachid on Shabbos? No. Remember again, the only thing that happens in the Beis HaMikdash is communal service. That's the only thing. Personal karbanos are not brought on Shabbos because it's a malacha d'oraisa. The malacha is only set aside when the Torah says. So listen to what Rav Huna says. Rav Huna says when it comes to Shabbos, tchilasa docha. Tchilasa means you could offer a Shabbos karban on Shabbos. But it says Rav Huna, sofo eino docha. The end of sacrificial service is not Docha Shabbos. Look at Rashi. What is Sofa on a Docha? Tamid Shal Erev Shabbos Ein Eivarev Naktir Mishatech Shach Ella Malan Miba'od Yom. So what's this incredible? Rav Huna comes along and says the only thing that's Docha Shabbos is what he calls Tchilasov or Tchilas Avoda. The actual offering of a carbon of a Shabbos carbon, that's Docha Shabbos. But anything that has to do with non-Shabbos karbanos cannot be done on Shabbos. So Rav Huna says, for example, this is fascinating. On Friday, right on Erev Shabbos, you would offer up whatever karbanos you're offering up on Shabbos. According to Rav Huna, when do you burn the leftover fats and limbs from Friday's sacrificial service? Before Shabbos. All of that has to be done before Shabbos. So therefore, Rav Huna categorically rejects Bar Kafra Rabbi Meir. Because remember again, Bar Kafra Rabbi Meir was saying that whenever you have leftover limbs the next morning, no problem. Just make a new ma'arach and burn it on Shabbat. Burn it. And even on Shabbat. So what are you talking about? What are you talking about? Tchilasa docha, sofo eino docha. The only thing you could do on Shabbos is the actual hakrava, the actual offering of a Shabbos karban. But anything that is related to sacrificial items before Shabbos, All that's got to be closed out before Shabbos starts. You cannot do anything with that on Shabbos itself. So Gufa, let's analyze this. Amrafuna, both it's really a fascinating shita. So Amrafuna, Tamid, so we'll say now we're going to expand on this a bit. Tamid, Tchilaso Docha, Sofa Eno Docha. So we'll say here it is. Rafuna says, Halacha L'maisa, Carbon Tamid, the beginning of the Tamid is Docha Shabbos, the end is not Docha Shabbos. The end is not Docha Shabbos. So it says the Gemara, so what does that mean? So we'll say now this is a machlokes. My Eno Docha. So we'll say, what is it? What's not nidcha? What's not set aside? Right. So let's look at Rav Huna's words. Rav Huna's words are right when it comes to the carbon tamid, the beginning is docha, sets aside Shabbos. The end is not docha. Says the Gemara, what are we referring to? What is set aside? What is set aside? Ma'ina docha. So the Gemara says, Rav Chisda Amar docha es haShabbos ve'ino docha es haTumah. Rav Chisda said, interestingly enough, that halacha l'maisa, so the carbon tamid will be docha Shabbos, but not docha Tumah. Now look at Rashi. What does that mean? My eno docha es haTumah, hekter chalavim ve'imurin, elas rikas tamol bilvad. So let's listen to this. Rav Chisda will say like this, that what Rav Huna is coming to say is as follows. The tamid is docha Shabbos. Shabbos, which means that halacha l'maisa, anything you have to do for the carbon tamid, you could do on Shabbos. The tamid, and specifically again, the burning of the fats and limbs, is not docha tumah. The Rebbe say, let's take a step back here for just a moment. Remember, tumah is nidcha b'tzibur, which means that the laws of tumah are set aside for any communal offering when the majority of the community is tameh. What Rav Chisda is suggesting, however, is which part of the sacrificial service is set aside for communal tumah? Only what? Only zrika. Because we'll say, remember again, what is the most important part of the carbonic service? Zrika. Right? Once you do zrika, everything else, it's not optional, it's mandatory, but everything else, if for some reason you didn't get to it or were unable to do it, does not compromise the carbon. This is incredibly important. So we'll say this is fascinating. So if Chisda says like this, when it comes to Shabbos, the carbon tamid is docha Shabbos. Absolutely. And which parts of the tamid? Every part of the tamid is docha Shabbos. When it comes to tumah, the only part of the tamid, in a situation of communal tumah, the only part of the carbon tamid which is docha tumah is what? Is the zrika. So we'll say, for example, in a situation of communal tumah, you'll do the zrikas hatamid, but you would not burn the limbs on the mizbeach. This is very interesting. Where would you burn the limbs? Michutz lamachana, like any other carbon that became tamei. So when we say tumah hutra b'tzibor or tumah dechuya b'tzibor, that will ultimately allow for the zrikas hadam, but will not allow for the rest of the sacrificial service. V'Rava Amar, Rava says, or actually changes it to Rabba. Rabba Amar docha es hatuma ve'ino docha es hashabbos. Rabba says no. What it means is that carbon tamid is docha tuma, but it's not docha Shabbos. Rabba say so. What you have is a fundamental machlokes over here. You have Rav Chisda saying that halacha l'maisa on Shabbos, pretty much you could do anything you need to do for the tamid. Which Rabba say also sounds like what? Also sounds like you could even burn leftover fats and limbs from yesterday's tamid on Shabbos, right? Because essentially the laws of Shabbos are set aside vis-a-vis the halachos of tamid. But when it comes to tumah, the only thing you could do vis-a-vis the carbon tamid in a state of communal tumah is zrika. Rabbah disagrees, and Rabbah says that halacha l'maisa, when it comes to communal tumah, the laws of tumah totally set aside for everything when it comes to the carbon tamid. So not only can you do zrika in a state of tamid, but in a state of tumah, but you could even burn the carbon on the mizbeach in a state of tumah, but it's not docha Shabbos. It's not docha Shabbos, which Rabbi say sounds like when it comes to Shabbos, the only thing you're allowed to do with the tamid is the most basic obligations, but nothing additional. Certainly can't burn any leftover pieces on Shabbos. Amrli Abayis. We'll say let's analyze this. Abayis says, Amrli Abayis l'Rabba. L'didach kasha l'Rav Chisda kasha. Abayis says to Rabba, I have both according to you and Rav Chisda, I have a kasha. What's the kasha? L'didach kasha Rabba. According to you there's a kasha. Maishno toma dichsib b'mo'ado. So we'll say, Rabba, why do you say that ultimately a carbon tamid could be offered up in a state of tumah, and every part of the tamid could be done in tumah, because the Torah uses lashon of mo'ado. Mo'ado also means that the carbon tamid must be offered up in its appointed time. And what that phrase appointed time means is no matter what's going on, right? You are permitted to offer up the carbon tamid. The Gemara says Shabbos nami b'mo'ado v'afilu b'Shabbos. Well, if that's the case, we'll say the word mo'ado is also used by Shabbos. If that's the case, that ultimately tamid could be performed in a state of tumah, then tamid should be able to be performed on Shabbos as well. Rav Chisda kasha, according to Rav Chisda, there's a kasha. What's the kasha according to Rav Chisda? Ma'ishna Shabbos techsid b'mo'ado. Why is Shabbos different? That ultimately you allow the tamid to be done on Shabbos because it says mo'ado. The Gemara says tumah nami mo'ado v'afilu b'tumah. So also here's what's interesting. Both Rabba and Rav Chisda are both darshaning the same word, which is mo'ado in its appointed time, which tells us that carbon tamid has to be offered up under all circumstances. Rav Chisda is choosing to focus on Shabbos. Rabba's choosing to focus on Tumah. But says Abai to both of them, it's the same word. You're both darshaning the same word. So ultimately, again, the kasha is on both of you from the drasha you choose not to make. Amar to which Rabba responds, Lo l'didi kasha lo Rav Chisda kasha. Rabba says, no, Abaye, you're wrong. It's not a kasha of Rav Chisda. Why not? Lididi lo kashya. So Rabbi says, according to me, there's no question why. Sofo kitchilaso. Kisil is like this. The end is like the beginning. What does that mean? Tuma. So ultimately, again, Rabbi will say like this. Tuma ditchilaso bar mitcha tumahu. Sofo nami dachi. So we'll say, take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Tuma ditchilaso bar mitcha tumahu. Sofo nami dachi. Rashi says, Tuma ditchilaso. Matchilaso bar mitchi tuma ha'im ein koin tar lizarik damo. So we'll say, listen to this. So Rabbi will say like this. The halacha by tuma Rabbi will say is tuma ultimately again essentially hutra b'tzibor, or at least duchui b'tzibor. What he's saying is like this. When it comes to tuma, let's say you have the following situation where halacha l'maisa, there is no, his example is there is no kohen who is tar to do this rika. So we'll say, what happens in a situation like this? There is no tar kohen available to do this rika. So what happens? What's the halacha? You have a tamei kohen do it. So just like in the initial stages, if there is no one tar to do the avoda, we let someone who is tamei go ahead and do it. So sofo not midachi. So essentially, again, the end of the carbonic process is the same exact thing. In other words, we'll say, what Rabbi will say is like this, that halacha l'maisa, tchilaso, or essentially sofo kit, what was his lashon? Sofo kit tchilaso. The end of the process is just like the beginning of the process, and just like in the end of the process, in the beginning of the process, if there is no one who is tahar to be able to do the avoda, ultimately again we let someone who's tamei do it. So to close out the process, if there is no one who, or there is no way to do it betara, we do it betuma. Shabbos ditchilaso lav bar mitcha Shabbosu sofa nami lo dachi. But ultimately, again, Rabbi will say like this: Shabbos, Rabbi will say, there is no license to be docha Shabbos on the front end. So too, there's no license to be docha Shabbos on the back end. Now, what does that mean? Or beginning and end? Look at Rashi. Shabbos ditchilaso the tamid de erev Shabbos lav bar mitcha. Lav bar mitcha Shabbos. Shari ben arbayim nishchat v'dam nifsa b'shkei hachama. So we'll say, listen to this. This is fascinating. Rabbi will say like this. Rabbi will say, is there any way to ever offer up the Friday tamid on Shabbos? Is there any way for that to happen? And the answer is no. There's no way for that to happen. So the same way that the beginning of the erev Shabbos tamid is not docha Shabbos, so to what? The end of the erev Shabbos tamid is not docha Shabbos. The Rebbe will say, now what does that mean, the end? What does that mean, the end? The end would be the leftover limbs from Friday. So Rabbi will say like this: Tumah is unique because by Tumah, same way the beginning of the process sets aside the halachos of Tumah, so to the end of the process will set aside Tumah. But by Shabbos, the quote-unquote beginning of the process doesn't set aside Shabbos. Now, what he's calling the beginning of the process is you can never offer, if for some reason you forgot to offer up the Friday Tamid, right? You will say, is there any way to do that on Shabbos? No. Besides the fact that there's no makeup, in other words, there's no way to begin the Friday Avodah, the Friday Tamid on Shabbos itself. So too, therefore, says Rabbah, the end of the service cannot be done on Shabbos as well. Rav Chisda lo kash. So I'll say that's Rabbah's argument. Rav Chisda lo kash. According to Rav Chisda, ultimately, again, there's no contradiction. Why not? He'll say Sofo kitchilaso Leslie. He doesn't hold of this concept of Sofo kitchilaso. Rather, what will he say? Shabbos tehutrahi b'tzibor sofanami dachi. Tomo de dechuyi b'tzibor. Said the Gemara says Tchilasa the Ikar Kapara Dachi, Sofo the Lat Ikar Kapara Lo Dachi. So we'll say, listen to this. Bless you. Listen to this. We'll say Rav Chisda has a simpler approach. Rav Chisda says you're equating Shabbos and Tumah. They're not the same. They're not the same. Rav Chisda posits Shabbos Hutra B'tzibur, Tumah Dechuya B'tzibur. Now we'll say, remember again, we've seen this before in Maseches Pesachim. We'll say, what's the difference between Hutra and Dechuya? Hutra means that for this particular issue, it's as if it's not Shabbos. We'll see, we'll plug that in just a moment. Dechuya means what? It's Shabbos. But under duress, we're going to allow you to do certain things that we would not normally allow you to do on Shabbos. So we'll say, now listen to this. So, or allow you to do certain things. So listen to this. So Rav Chisda will say like this. Rav Chisda will say, Shabbos Hutra B'tzibor. When it comes to sacrificial service, communal sacrificial service, we treat Shabbos like what? We treat Shabbos like what? Like a Tuesday. It's like in other words, the halachos of Shabbos do not apply to communal service, which I will say is a very true statement. They don't. I want to point out, we'll say, when you offer up the carbon tamid on Shabbos, do you do it with the shinui? Right? So what does that show you? Right? Is there any part of communal service, of communal carbon that you leave off on Shabbos? No. So if Chisda will say, what does that tell me? That tells me, though, when it comes to Shabbos, Shabbos Hutra B'tzibor. That halacha l'maisa, when it comes, again, I want to be very clear. This is referring to a very narrow area of what? Of communal sacrificial service. When it comes to communal sacrificial service, we offer up karbanos in the Beis Hamikdash on a Shabbos like it was a Tuesday. There's no difference. So if Chisda says, because there's no difference, it's quite possible to say that what? It's quite possible to say that halacha l'maisa, right? That halacha l'maisa, the dochash, right? That ultimately, again, offering up the carbon tamid in all of its aspects, and maybe even going ahead and what? Going ahead and offering up the leftover fats and limbs will be permitted on Shabbos. Tumah, on the other hand, is hutra b'tzibor. So we'll say, what does that mean if Tumah is hutra b'tzibor? I'm sorry. Tumah's dechuya b'tzibor, right? Which means that I will say, under duress, we will go ahead and set aside the laws of Tumah for the sake of communal sacrificial service. Now, what does that mean? We'll let you do the sacrificial minimum in order to be able to affect karbanos, communal offerings, but no more. Which in the Rama of karbanos also means what? What's the sacrificial minimum? Zrika. So we'll let you do Zrika. In a state of Tumah. So therefore, I will say, if 51% of Klal Yisrael is Tameh, or there's not a Kohen, ultimately, again, who will start to able to perform the Avodah, we'll let him perform the Zrika, but are we going to let him burn the limbs of the carbon on the Mizbeach? Absolutely not. So we'll say this is the machlokes, ultimately, again, Rabban and Chisda. I will say, now how do we paskin? Now, remember, there are two things that's happening over there. There are two discussions. Right? Discussion number one is, let's start with Shabbos, right? Two things, two areas of concern. Discussion number one is, if I have leftover limbs from Friday's Tamid, right? So remember again, I offered the Tamid on Friday afternoon. I put it on the Mizbeach to burn, even before Shabbos. Now I have leftover limbs on Shabbos. Can I burn leftover limbs from Friday on Shabbos? That's question number one. That's a general Hilchos Mikdash, Hilchos Shabbos question. Can I burn leftover sacrificial matter, weekday sacrificial matter, on Shabbos? Shaila number 2 is what? Is halacha l'maisa for Hilchos Tumah. For Hilchos Tumah, if a carbon was offered up in a state of Tumah, so Zrika was done in a state of Tumah, why? Because Tumah Hutra B'tzibor, am I able to offer up the animal now, the limbs on the Mizbeach? Those are the two shaylas. Hilchos Shabbos shayla, Hilchos Tuma shayla. So Bosai, here we go. The Rambam, interesting enough, deals with both of these shaylas. In Hilchos Tamidin and Musafin, Perek Aleph, Halacha Zayin. Listen to the Rambam. Zot the Rambam, Ivarim Shal Tamid, Dochen Es HaTuma, Ve'in Dochen Es HaShabbos. Wow. There was a little bit of mixing and matching going on over here. So the Rambam says, the ability to go ahead and offer up the limbs of the Tamid are Doche Tumah, which Abosai means, according to the Rambam, Halacha L'Maisa, once you have license to offer up a carbon bitumah, you have the license to do what? To do what? Everything. So it's not just Zrika. You see, again, the Havamina was, all that Tumah allows you to do is do the Zrika, because Zrika is the ikar of the carbon, but then nothing else. You can't put that animal on the Zech, it's Tameh. The Rambam says no. Once you're allowed to offer up Bitumah, Tumah Hutra B'tzibor. And therefore, once Tumah's Hutra B'tzibor, essentially, Abosai, not only do you do the Zrika B'tumah, but you go through the entire sacrificial process. You do everything in a state of Tumah. Incredible. However, listen to this. He holds that Ivarim Shal Tamid are not Docha Shabbos. Now, Abosai, now what does that mean? Ela Be'erev Shabbos Bilvad Maktirin Eivari Tamid Shal Erev Shabbos. So Abosai, this is fascinating. You think your Erev Shabbos is hectic. Abosai, listen to this. In the Beis Hamikdash, they lost a night. Because remember, again, Abosai, what would normally happen in the Beis Hamikdash? What would normally happen? You close out the sacrificial service of the day. And remember, again, everything in the Beis Hamikdash pretty much ends at sunset. Right? You kindle the menorah, and then we're done for the day. So you have the night to do what? To do what? To burn all the leftovers. Well, that doesn't happen, says Rambam, on Shabbos. On Shabbos, you could not burn the leftover fats and limbs from Friday on Shabbos night. So you, bless you, so you would have to make sure everything was done before Shabbos. I will say this halacha l'maisa. You cannot go ahead and burn anything from Friday on Shabbos itself. Ela be'erev Shabbos bilvad maktirin evrei tamish erev Shabbos. Rather, again, it was only on erev Shabbos itself that they had to burn all the leftover fats and limbs. Listen to this. I will say, here's the formulation. Shatamid tchilaso doche Shabbos v'sofo eino doche. I will say, here's the formulation. Because what are you allowed to do on Shabbos? Tchilas tamid. I will say, tchilas tamid means you could offer up a tamid, but you cannot go ahead and do the concluding processes of tamid. So you can't burn yesterday's karbanos on Shabbos itself. Similarly, again, Chalvei Shabbos Kivim B'Leili Yom to find. So I will say, so that's the halacha. It just is really, really fascinating. So halacha l'maisa with Rambam Paskins that Tumah is docha. Or I should say, Ivarim Shal Tamid are docha in Tumah. And therefore I will say, when you have a license to offer up a carbon b'tumah, you offer up the carbon in its entirety. But on Shabbos, only Tchilas Tamid is docha. You could go ahead and shech the Tamid on Shabbos, but you are not permitted to go ahead and what? Burn leftover fats. So I will say, so incredible. Now you have a picture of Erev Shabbos in the Beis Hamikdash. Everything had to be done prior to Shkia. You don't have the night to burn the fats and limbs. Beautiful. But say, let's go right. We're going to finish the parak. Itmar. Habachave ishmach tomra. We'll say, this is a fascinating case. What happens, I will say, if remember again, let's go back for just a moment. You're going ahead and the Kohen is getting the fire, he's getting the coals for the Ketores. Where does he get the coals for the Ketores? On a regular day, not Yom Kippur. On a regular day, where does he get the coals for the Ketores? Ma'aracha Kitana. Right, the small Ma'aracha. So he's going ahead and getting the coals. Or I will say he's getting the Ish for the menorah. Now this is very interesting as well. Also, we made reference to this yesterday and I didn't go into it. When we talk about the fire for the menorah, what's the fire for the menorah? So we'll say this is a big machlokas. So Rashi seems to indicate that halacha l'maisa, he would actually take a coal. He would take a coal from the top of the mizbeach and use that coal to go ahead and ignite the menorah. Tosfos is actually Tosfos on Menheiram Beis, Divrei Maschil Tamid, puts in there, he says no, he didn't take a coal, he would take a splinter of wood and use that. I will say again, it's just an interesting machlokes. Was it a coal? Was it a splinter of wood? Either way, the fire source is being taken from the top of the mizbeach. Now I will say, here's the interesting shaila. What happens if you extinguish that fire? So let's illustrate this with the guitar. It's a little bit easier. Right, so the Kohen goes remembering, I will say, you could imagine the process. You can imagine, we're going to see it soon in Mir Hashem. Kohen walks up the Mizbeach. Remember again, how does the Kohen normally get to the Mizbeach? Little chazon, Rabbi. So this is very. I lost my on the wall thing also, but I'll show you this just for a moment. So I just want to point out. Remember, How does the Kohen walk up? How does he walk up? Right hand side. Excellent. So he's walking up. Remember again, he's walking up the right hand side. And Abba said, now you can see. Now, what he's going to do is he walks up the right and he circles the Mizbeach. He circles the Mizbeach. This is the Ma'arocha Kitana. Then he's going to come down the left western side. He's going to come down. He takes his coal, right? So you can imagine it. He got his shovel. He got his coal. And Abba said, now what happens? He extinguishes it. He puts it out. So we'll say the Gemara is discussing. So what's the halacha? Is he chayiv? Is he chayiv for that? The act of extinguishing. So we'll say. So what is it? This is not a hilchos Shabbos shayla. This is the Gemara. The Torah says we're going to see that the fire of the mizbeach must be an ongoing fire. So the shayla is ish tamid tu kadbo. So the shayla is if you actively extinguish fire taken from the mizbeach, are you chayiv for an act of extinguishing Mizbeach fire or not? So Abaye Amar Chayiv, Abaye says you're Chayiv, and ultimately again Rava Amar Pater. Rava says that you're Pater. So the Gemara says, let's analyze this. So first of all, let's take a look at Rashi. Mechabe ish machta menorah la'achar shechasa gichadon l'machta olu menorah kivan. So we'll say after you went ahead and you removed. So the case over here is, I want to be clear, you removed the coal from the fire for the ketores, or the splinter or the coal for the menorah. Then after you removed it, you extinguished it. Are you chayiv? Now, boss, I know what you're asking. What are you thinking to yourself? Oh, why would anyone extinguish it? Right? Why would anyone do this? So, boss, I just want to point out, isn't it maisim b'chol yom that we intentionally extinguish fires? Right? I will say again, each of us has a spark of the Ribono Shel Olam inside of us. Each of us has a beautiful neshama. Each of us has so much kedusha, and yet we knowingly sin, and yet we knowingly do things that are just not good. We knowingly extinguish our fire each and every day. So it's not so crazy to come up with a case of someone who extinguishes a fire. B'pashtus, we're talking about intentionally, right? Because if it's unintentionally, again, if b'pashtus, not a wind comes along and extinguishes the fire, what chiyuv is there going to be? But unfortunately, people extinguish fires intentionally all of the time. Sabai says you're chayiv, Rava says you're pater. So the Gemara says, well, let's analyze this. To which the Gemara says, the kavye berosho shal mizbeach. So where are you doing this? If you go ahead and you're doing this on the Mizbeach itself, everyone will agree that halacha l'maisa you're chayiv, because they will say, what are you doing? If you extinguish this fire while you're standing on the Mizbeach, they will say, what are you effectively doing? You are extinguishing Mizbeach fire. There's a passage that says, lo sichabe, right? Lo sichbe. You are not allowed to extinguish the Mizbeach fire. So if we're talking about a case where the Kohen is literally standing on top of the Mizbeach and he extinguished the fire, then of course everyone will agree that he's chayiv for that. So keep ligi. Where does the machlokes come up? The achse a'ara v'kabye. The machlokes comes up where the Kohen has already come down from the Mizbeach, and now once he's come down from the Mizbeach, now he extinguishes it. Abai Amar Chayiv. Abai will say that you're chayiv. Why? Ish Mizbeachu. Abai will say you're chayiv because at the end of the day, this is still called the fire of a Mizbeach. Even though you've removed it from the top of the Mizbeach, it's still called Mizbeach fire, and therefore you will be chayiv. Rava Amar Pater, Rava will say you're Pater. Why? Kevan dinaska naska. Rava will say once you remove the fire from the Mizbeach, it is no longer Mizbeach fire. And therefore, if you extinguish it, you are not in violation. But remember again, we're speaking about a very specific law, never to extinguish the fire of the Mizbeach. So what the Gemara is now suggesting is as follows. If you're standing on top of the Mizbeach and you went ahead and you extinguished this fire, everyone will agree that you are chayiv. Where's the machlokes Abaye and Rava? If ultimately, again, you took the fire down from the Mizbeach and now you extinguished it, so Abaye will say that you're chayiv because that's still called Mizbeach fire because it emanated from the Mizbeach. Rava will say you're pater. Why are you pater? Once you remove it from the Mizbeach, it's no longer Mizbeach fire. So the Gemara says, Ela hadu amrav Nachman ara baravua hamorid gachelas me'al gabe Mizbeach v'kiba. If a person removed the coal from the top of the Mizbeach and then extinguished it, chayiv. You're chayiv for that. To which the Gemara says, Kiman, whose opinion does that reflect? Ka'abaye. That bepashos would be like Abaye. To which the Gemara says, no, afilutima ki Rava, can even be like Rava. Hasam lo intik lemitzvasa, hacha intik lemitzvasa. So we'll say this is very interesting. It could very well be as follows. When you remove, even according to Rava, when you remove the coal or the fire for the sake of doing a mitzvah, it could be that the act of removal for a mitzvah, which is a sanctioned act, removes that fire from being Mizbeach fire. But when the fire was just removed not for a mitzvah, the fire still remains tethered to the Mizbeach, and therefore, again, any act of extinguishing will be problematic. Ikudamir, alternate version of this, if you brought the fire down to the ground, in other words, you took it off the Mizbeach and you extinguished it, everyone will agree that you're pater. So keep pligi, where does the machlokes come up? Berosho shal Mizbeach, if you extinguished it while standing on the Mizbeach. Abai Amar Chayiv Ish Mizbeachu. Abai will say that you're Chayiv. Why? Because this is called the Mizbeach fire. You extinguish the Mizbeach fire. Rava Amar Pater. Rava will say you're Pater. Why? Cave in the Naska. Rava will say it depends. Once you remove that fire from the Ma'aracha, Rava posits that what? It's no longer Mizbeach fire, even though geographically, where are you standing? Where are you standing? On top of the Mizbeach. To which the Gemara says, if one goes ahead and brings down a coal from the Mizbeach and extinguished it, he's chayiv kiman. Whose opinion does that reflect? Lo ka'abaye velo k'Rava. Not like Abaye and not like Rava. To which the Gemara says, no, hasam lo intik lemitzvasa. Ultimately, again, I will say there, the difference is, halacha l'maisa has not been removed for the mitzvah. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, because of that, is still considered to be Eish of the Mizbeach. Hacha, intik l'mitzvasa. But here we're talking about a case where it was removed already for the mitzvah. So we'll say, how do we paskin? How do we paskin? Halacha l'maisa, again, how do we paskin in this particular situation? So we'll say, so remember again, we have a number of different variables over here. Number one, really the fundamental shaila is, how tethered is fire to the altar? Right? That's the fundamental shaila. Do we say once you remove it from the ma'aracha, even though what you're standing on top of the mizbeach, that is no longer mizbeach? We'll say that's the core question. Everyone agrees that what am I chayiv for? What am I chayiv? What am I chayiv? If I extinguish mizbeach fire, that's what everybody agrees with. The shaila is, how long is fire, or to what point is fire considered to be mizbeach fire? Do we say once I remove it from the pyre, even though again I'm standing on the mizbeach, that's no longer mizbeach fire? Or do we say no? As long as it's on the mizbeach, even if it's detached from the pyre, that is still called mizbeach. So how do we pass? Listen to this. Rambam. The Rambam is always there for us. And I will say there are certain things in life you could always depend on. You could always depend on Rashi. You could always depend on the Rambam. That's about it, right? And of course, you can always depend on the Ribbon Shalom. I should say you can always depend on the Ribbon Shalom, Rashi, and the Rambam. Other than that, you can't depend on much. So the Rambam writes as follows. So he says, goes to Midin and Musafin, Parak Beis Halach Avav. HaMechabe Eisham Mizbeach. So we'll say first that starts with the rule. If you extinguish the fire of the Mizbeach, Loka, you get Malchus, right? You're in violation of a lav. What's the lav? Lo Sichbe. The Torah says you are not permitted to extinguish the fire. Watch this. Afilu gacheles acheres. Even if you extinguish one coal, you are in violation. Va'afila horida me'ala mizbeach v'kiba loka. And says the Rambam, even if you take a coal down from the ma'aracha, you take it off the mizbeach and you actively extinguish it, you are in violation of the lav. So both say, number one, the Rambam says that halacha l'maisa, even if you remove mizbeach fire from the mizbeach, it's still called what? Mizbeach fire. And if you extinguish it, you are in violation. However, aval, ish machta ve'ish menorah shechinu b'mizbeach lahalik mena, afa pi shekiba osam b'rosh ha-mizbeach pater, shar niska l'mitzvah acheres ve'in ani kor me'ish nezeh. Listen to this, so Rambam paskin, halacha l'maisa, like this. Fire of the mizbeach is always called fire of the mizbeach. Right? So whether you extinguish it on the Mizbeach or whether you take it off and you extinguish it on the ground, ultimately, again, that is called Mizbeach fire. However, the exception is as follows. Once you remove coals from the fire for the sake of a mitzvah, or be the example, the sake of a mitzvah, for the ketores, or for the menorah, it loses its identity as Mizbeach fire. It's no longer Mizbeach fire. And therefore, right there, even while you're standing on the Mizbeach itself. And therefore, halacha l'maisa is supposed to say. So therefore, again, let's plug this in. So case number one is if you were to go up to the mizbeach, take a coal, and actively extinguish it. Whether you extinguished that coal on the top of the mizbeach or you extinguished that coal on the ground, what's the halacha? Chayiv. However, if halacha l'maisa, you go ahead and what? If halacha l'maisa, you go ahead and you go ahead and the Kohen takes the shovel full of coals for the Kitoras, or takes the splinter for the menorah, once he removes that from the Ma'aracha, it no longer has the status of Mizbeach, fire. So if you were to remove those coals and then actively extinguish it, he would not be chayiv. It's only if you remove the coals or remove the splinter, not for the sake of a mitzvah, it retains its Mizbeach identity wherever you are, either on the Mizbeach or off the Mizbeach as well. We'll say that is the halacha l'maisa. Hadjun alach tarach bekalfi. Mazel tov. We'll say, Hashem b'shatom mitzlachas, new parak tomorrow. Shkoyach.